Welcome back to Sawtooth Tactical. SBRs should not be on the NFA. They should not be regulated any more than any other firearm. In fact, technically, none of them should be regulated at all, as our forefathers intended. But they are. And these ones are regulated especially strictly compared to regular handguns, rifles with 16-inch or longer barrels. And to me, when these exist, pistol braces, it's pretty ridiculous that you still have to pay a tax stamp and go through the whole NFA process to put a different piece of plastic on the back of your gun. But what are the differences between pistols and SBRs? Not pistols as in handguns, but like AR pistols and SBRs. And what are the pros and cons of each? We're going to talk about that a little bit today, so make sure you're subscribed and let's get into it. The reason this video is coming to you today is because if you're following the channel, you might know that I am currently building a Mark 18. Now this Mark 18 will be an SBR, a registered short-barreled rifle. But first, it's going to be a pistol. And that's how all of my SBRs started out, was as pistols with braces, and they later became SBRs. Why did I choose to make them SBRs when I could have just continued running them with braces the entire time? It costs you more money, in fact, $200 per firearm to make it an SBR. And in the case of most of mine by now, these are 2-stamp guns. That's a $400 tax stamp fee per gun. This one again, suppressor, and it will eventually be an SBR. Suppressor, SBR. Now, I mean, this one, the suppressor moves between all my 5.56 guns. So it's not necessarily that the tax stamp was just on this gun for the suppressor, but when I decide to make it an SBR, it will be. Now, making it into an SBR will be the last $200 that I spend on this build, because in the meantime, I can finish putting it together with this SB Tactical SBA3 brace. And in fact, it even has a flat dark earth strap on it, which kind of matches the color theme of this pistol right now until it becomes an SBR. And we're going to talk about a couple things with this build specifically because I'm still waiting on the lower to come in. And if I wanted to, I could put it on this lower. This is a registered SBR lower, and I could go out and shoot it right now. I couldn't put it on this lower though, which is too bad because this ADM lower has the same controls as the Griffin Armament lower that I'm getting for it. And so it'd be nice to be able to test it on a lower that's gonna do the same things. But I can't do that because this is a 14.5-inch pinned and welded. It's not an SBR, and so if I put this shorter barreled upper on a non-SBR standard rifle lower, I would be committing a felony, one where I could get charged and get $250,000 in fines and up to 10 years in prison because I would decide to put it on that lower instead of this lower or this lower. And that's where I kind of get into how ridiculous the laws around SBRs are. I could put this upper on a pistol lower with this brace, perfectly fine. I could put it on an already registered SBR lower, perfectly fine. But I can't put it on this lower because that's a felony. And that to me is absolutely ridiculous. But let's hear a quick word from our channel partner. If you'd like to help support Sawtooth Tactical, the very best way to do that is to click the first link in the description. That link is aura.com/sawtooth-tactical. If you use my link, you get a 2-week free trial. And you can quit anytime, but you probably want to stick with it as I have. What has Aura done for me? Well, I don't get any spam calls anymore. I don't get spam emails. I don't get calls from scammers. What they do is they find all the data brokers that have your information online. They submit opt-out requests on your behalf so that you don't get scammers and spam calls anymore. But they do a lot of other things too. They have a VPN, which just helps to protect your privacy. They've got a ton of stuff, And it all comes in at a very low price. If you stick with it after that 2 weeks, it is only $12 a month. I think Aura is pretty cool because they sponsor gun-related channels, which not a lot of sponsors are willing to do that. And it really helps channels like mine be able to produce this kind of content. YouTube doesn't really like to monetize gun-related videos anymore. And so sponsors like Aura make things like Mark 18 builds possible. So check it out. It's definitely worth trying it out for 2 weeks. Like I said, you're probably going to want to stick with it. I don't have to worry about scammers anymore. I don't have to worry about spam calls, spam emails. And that's been really nice. I use my phone for work, and so I have to answer calls that I don't recognize all the time. And none of them are scammers anymore. And I really like that. So again, check it out. First link in the description, aura.com/sawtooth-tactical. I can almost guarantee that you're going to love it. Check it out. So a quick bit of history before we get into the pros and cons of pistol versus SBR, because I know that people feel very strongly about this. I've read it in the comments on my videos, as well as videos that other channels have done on this same topic. Now, why are SBRs regulated as NFA, National Firearms Act items? Well, when the NFA was getting put together, they wanted to outlaw handguns. And I'm not going to go into the whole NFA because today we're specifically talking pistol SBR. But I mean, honestly, suppressors shouldn't be on it either. I mean, there should be no NFA. That should be the number one thing, in my opinion, that we should be fighting against in the Second Amendment community. Because the NFA is a huge, huge violation of our rights. But to get back to the point here, one of the things that they were trying to do with the NFA was to outlaw regular handguns. And in the process of that, they wanted to close a perceived loophole, being that they thought that people could take a rifle, cut the barrel down, and basically make it into a handgun, even though it would still be classified as a rifle. And so that's where the whole short-barreled rifle thing came about, was basically as a stopgap solution so that people couldn't create their own handguns out of rifles, since what they were looking to do was to ban handguns. Well, before the NFA was put into place, they realized that the general public, the American citizens, would not go for a ban on handguns. It's very unfortunate that they decided that the public would go for all the other things in the NFA, but that, unfortunately, is what it is. What they failed to do was to take SBRs off the NFA, which were, again, only there so that people didn't turn rifles into handguns by shortening the barrels on them. And so SBRs have been regulated as NFA items ever since. And there are quite a few reasons, in my opinion, that they shouldn't be. And so we're going to get into that real quick. And these are just, I mean, in my opinion, for every reason they shouldn't be. But for these reasons specifically, they shouldn't be regulated more than any other firearm. So for one, common use. So SBRs are in common use, especially now with the whole pistol brace thing that went on all last year. One of the big things is that the ATF was claiming that a firearm with a pistol brace with a barrel less than 16 inches, so basically this, but with a brace on it, is actually an SBR and has been an SBR this whole time. Well, it was basically proven that there's between 10 and 40 million of these pistol braces out there attached to firearms. 10 to 40 million, and that's just braced pistols. That's not including actual registered SBRs. Well, if the ATF considers braced pistols to be SBRs, and there's that many tens of millions of braced pistols, plus the actual registered SBRs, well then they are clearly in common use, meaning that they shouldn't be able to be regulated the way that they are. Besides that, this brace, the ATF has flip-flopped on it for years, whether you could shoulder these or not. For a while, you could have a brace on your gun, but you had to like put it on your cheek or something. If you shouldered it, you were redesigning it and turning it into an SBR just by the act of shouldering it. Well, they no longer feel that way. I mean, they probably feel that way, but they've put out a letter in 2017 saying that you can shoulder a braced pistol. Well, what is the difference really between this and this? And this is going to come up later in our argument as to why SBRs. But really, I mean, I've shot a lot of braced pistols. In fact, every one of these SBRs used to be a braced pistol. And I've shot a lot of SBRs, a lot of real stocks. And yes, a real stock is better. It feels better. It's more ergonomic. It looks better. It just does what a stock does better. But you know what? This works pretty dang good as well. You know, it's specifically designed to use this Velcro to wrap around your arm to brace the gun so that you can shoot it one-handed. But it also seems to work pretty well if you do end up shouldering it. And so why then is something like this considered to be dangerous and unusual, but something like this that you can shoulder and use it in the exact same way is perfectly fine? And then why again is this dangerous and unusual weapon perfectly safe as long as you pay the government a $200 extortion fee? And so this is where we get into the pros and cons of braced pistols versus SBRs and why one would choose one versus the other. Because for a long time, I really believed in braced pistols. I didn't have any registered SBRs, and I thought braces were honestly a great way to avoid having to pay that $200 extortion fee, but still get a firearm that did pretty close to the same thing. That was also before I got any suppressors. One of the big arguments people have against SBRs and NFA items in general is that they don't want to be put on that government list. Well, in order to purchase a suppressor, you're going to have to get put on that list. And so once I got my first suppressor, I kind of stopped caring about that list so much. I was already on it. So what did it matter to me if I added some SBRs to the list as well? And so that is one of the big arguments as to why you would run a pistol brace versus a stock on something short like this. You save $200. $200 is not a small amount of money. And you also don't get put on that list. You don't have to send in fingerprints, a picture of yourself, information about your firearm, all that other crap that goes along with the NFA that is very highly unconstitutional. And I get that. And we shouldn't have to go through this SBR or NFA process in order to have SBRs. But right now we do. And another big reason that people want braced pistols rather than SBRs, and I see this over and over again in the comment section of videos, is because there are no travel restrictions. With a pistol brace, your gun is basically considered a handgun. And so you can take it, wherever you want, wherever handguns are okay to take with you, which is pretty much everywhere. But NFA items, some states don't even allow them. But even the ones that do, if you're going from your home state to another state and you have a registered SBR, you do have to notify the ATF. There's a form, and you send it into them a couple weeks in advance, and they give you permission to take your own personal property with you to a different state. That is kind of ridiculous. I've never actually gone through it myself because I've never traveled out of state with any of my SBRs. If I am going out of state, I have other things I can bring with me rather than, going through that process as well. But I also know plenty of people that have traveled with SBRs and have notified the ATF with the correct form, and they say it's very easy. So I don't know how much of an argument that really is. From the horse's mouth, from people that I know that have done it, in fact, done it quite frequently, they say not really a big deal at all. But that is one of the big arguments that I hear for braced pistols rather than SBRs. Now another one, and one that is legitimate, is that a braced pistol, again, is basically considered the same thing as a handgun. Well, a handgun you can carry on you concealed with a round in the chamber generally. Now again, check your local state laws and all that. I live in Idaho. Idaho is a pretty free state with constitutional carry. Some other states are not. But even the states that don't have constitutional carry, if you have your concealed carry permit, well then, a braced pistol is considered the same thing as your EDC. And so you can technically carry it legally, loaded, concealed, with a round in the chamber, just like you can with your handgun. Whereas in a lot of places, you cannot necessarily do that with a rifle. And so that is one argument as well. So there are good legal reasons to run a pistol brace rather than a stock on your short-barreled gun. So what are the reasons that you would choose to have an SBR then? It costs you more money and you're more restricted with it. Well, and this is going to sound dumb. For one thing, they look way cooler. Your gun just gets style points if it's an SBR. I'm sorry, I said what I said. It is what it is. For two, it's not just the stock. It's also that you can run a vertical foregrip. Now, when all of these were braced pistols, I ran different combinations of hand stops, finger stops. I had a angled foregrip on this 11.5 inch. Even things like this, the emissary handbrake here, this is not considered a vertical foregrip because it's not designed to hold like this. It's a hand stop, so you could run this on in a pistol configuration as well. Some people will argue that you can run the BCM vertical foregrip, and I call it that because BCM calls it that. The packaging says vertical foregrip, but it's not actually vertical if you look at it. I think it's like 87 or 89 degrees or something. It's not 90 degrees to the bore. So according to the statute, which does, I believe, say 90 degrees to the bore, technically this isn't vertical. At the same time, it's up to you whether you want to risk that or not. And now when it comes to risk, how much of a likelihood do you really think that there is that you're going to run into an ATF agent at the range that's going to check if your SBR is legal or not? Now, I do take my NFA paperwork with me when I go shoot with any of my NFA items. If in the case for this gun, I've got the paperwork for the SBR and the paperwork for the suppressor, just in case I ever had to show anybody. And when I say anybody, I literally only mean an ATF agent. A local cop can't force you to show your NFA paperwork. It's basically tax information. That's what the NFA is. So how likely is it that you'll ever actually have to prove that your NFA item is truly an NFA item? Probably highly unlikely. Like I said, I have copies of that paperwork of my tax stamp stuff in the different rifle cases that I have for when I go to the range, for when I'm carrying them around in my truck, just in case. But I think the likelihood of that is very low. And so I'm sure that tons of people have, SBRs that are not registered SBRs. And to them, I say, good for you, honestly. It's, this gun does not become more dangerous because it's got a stock rather than a brace. But somehow, it does become more illegal. And depending how much of a risk taker you are, that is totally up to you. Now, if I didn't have this YouTube channel and all my firearms weren't on display for the public or any ATF agents or anyone else that wanted to, scrutinize what I do, maybe my choices would be different. But for me, specifically with this channel and this platform, showing this stuff multiple times a week to thousands and thousands of people, well, mine are registered and are totally legal because it is not worth me getting my door kicked in the middle of the night and the living crap scared out of my daughter and myself, possibly, get in some kind of fight, lose our lives, lose my livelihood, get charged with felonies and lose the rights to own firearms for the rest of my life. Those kind of risks are not worth it for me at this point in my life. And so my SBRs are registered SBRs. And so why have I chosen to register all these as SBRs? Well, one big reason is this. So when I first got into firearms, I would kind of cheap out a bit. I would buy the most affordable things that I could that I thought were just as good. Well, as I have progressed in this firearms hobby lifestyle, I feel differently about it now. The guns that I get now are generally more expensive, and it's not really about the dollar amount, but it's about what I want them to be. And to me now, it is worth saving the money and spending the extra money to have exactly what I want. On this 14.5 inch, my dream rifle build, we did a whole series on it. I literally spared no expense and picked exactly every part that I wanted for that build. And for my current Mark 18 build, I'm doing the exact same thing. I'm not skimping to cut corners and make this thing cheap. And so when it comes to the stock, I'm gonna have a stock on it. And if it costs me $200 extra to be able to have a stock instead of a brace, well then so be it. But at the same time, that will be the last $200 that I spend on it, because in the meantime, I can spend my hard-earned money on the actual parts that I need to put this together. I can put this SBA 3 brace on it, and I can run it like that until I decide it's worth spending the money to SBR it. And then I can continue to run it like that while I'm waiting for them to approve that tax stamp. Because if you've been following the channel for a while, you know that I am not one of those lucky individuals that gets, a one-day approval on my NFA items. All of my suppressors have taken months. All of my SBRs have taken many months. So I do expect that I probably will be waiting for a while for that approval. But in the meantime, I can run it with this. And to be quite honest, I love the Emissary handbrake. I really fell in love with it on this build. But part of the reason that I chose it for this is because I didn't have to make a compromise as far as being able to run it as a pistol, but still have something that I wanted up here, because I've realized that I'm not really a big fan of like the Magpul angled foregrips. And so to me, that it makes it worth it to pay that $200 to have exactly the rifle that I want when it's all said and done. Will I run it as a pistol in the meantime? I absolutely will. Is it worth, maybe having SBRs and pistols so that you have something that you can carry around like a handgun or between states without having to ask the ATF? Sure. But at this point, I am actually making all my guns SBRs. And I know that I'm going to get the comment, free men don't ask for permission. Well, I get that. But you know what? By asking for that permission, I actually get the freedom to set my guns up the way that I want. It's a double-edged sword. But what do you guys think? Are you in the SBR camp? Are you in the braced pistol camp? Let me know what you think down below, because braced pistols are back on the menu. These are totally legal again. And I think, the judge, this was many, many months ago now. There's a judge, when we got into the national injunction on these, that literally said in his opinion that whether with a brace or with a stock, that the firearm becomes safer for the shooter and for anybody else, because it is then more accurate, because you're able to shoot it more accurately with a stock or a brace, even if it's shouldered, than without it. Which also begs the question as to, why does the ATF want our guns to be more dangerous? They talk about them being dangerous and unusual in this configuration, but it's a lot more dangerous if you have less control over the gun than if you can shoot it accurately and precisely. So another thing is this, the Second Amendment, a big part of the whole point of it is for the citizenry to be able to have the same weapons, the same firepower as the military. Well, the military doesn't just run 16-inch rifles, do they? The M4 is a 14.5-inch. They run SBRs. They specifically run Mark 18s. This is a SOCOM gun. That's where this whole model comes from. It's where the style comes from. That's part of the reason that I'm setting mine up the way that I am. Because it's a whole vibe, and it's, it is a military gun, a Mark 18, 10.3-inch barrel. And so, in that same vein, if we're supposed to be able to have the same guns as the military, well, the military runs SBRs, and they run suppressors, and they run machine guns. Don't forget that. But anyway, I want to know what you guys think, whether you agree with me on SBRs or not. I think that there's pros and cons to each, but as I go along, I find myself farther into the SBR camp than the pistol camp, even if I do see the benefits to running a braced pistol. If you enjoyed this video, please give me a like. Make sure you subscribed. And from Sawtooth Tactical, stay strapped or get clapped.